It's hilariously ironic because the carnivore people will accuse the vegans of being elitist and out of touch. And this is just the diet of the soy boys of the progressive 21st century.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse, bringing vegans together to help animals everywhere. The Vegan Posse will be on hiatus for the summer, so this will be our last regular episode for a little while. In the meantime, check out my website, ChristineMelanieBenson.com, for all the info on my novel, Marrying Myself, which features a vegan protagonist and is part of my personal mission to normalize veganism through the arts. If you're looking for coaching or consulting, you can find all the relevant information at that same website, ChristineMelanieBenson.com. And finally, if you've got questions, comments, guest suggestions, or just want to say hi, email veganposse.email@gmail.com. And to close out this spring season of the show, welcome to the May edition of Posse Talk with Jen Howk, the monthly series where my friend Dr. Jen Howk and I chat about life, love, veganism, and anything else on our minds. So enjoy this edition of Posse Talk with Jen Howk and have a great summer. All right, welcome to another edition of Posse Talk with Jen Howk. This is the monthly series where my friend Dr. Jen Howk and I shoot the breeze about veganism, life, love, relationships, and anything else that's on our mind or your mind. So Jen, good to see you. How's it going out there?
Likewise, been a very busy couple of weeks in the garden doing all kinds of outside stuff. So I'm still a little stuffy from getting assaulted by pollen, which normally doesn't bother me too much. But this year, really, something is different and something really got me. So
interesting. Okay. I still have not started gardening, so I have not followed through on my commitment from last month.
Not too late, but it's getting late in the season. So, but if you get some starts, you're fine. So, you could still go to your local nursery and get some established plants and just go plant them out. But it might be a little late to start things from seed. So,
okay. Well, everything I do would have to be in pots.
Yeah.
Or beds or something. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's actually this year because I've gotten so depleted morally and existentially by Mildred the Groundhog's attack on my garden plots. I have a whole bunch of things in pots on the deck. I have many more containers than usual. So I just set up a whole container garden of tomatoes and watermelon and zucchini and beans. And I think that's the main stuff that's out there. But I'm putting a lot of energy into the container garden because if it's out in the regular garden, she's going to eat it.
Yeah. So fill us in on Mildred.
Mildred is the groundhog that lives under my shed. And I think she's living her best life because the shed is also right next to the compost heap. So she gets to kind of just duck out and go get compost year round. But she is a voracious groundhog. Groundhogs apparently need to eat enormous quantities of food during the summer months in order to fatten up to hibernate all winter. So she eats everything and anything. I didn't have a single tomato last year because even though I planted 6 or 7 plants, she just ate them all when they were little baby plants. Did not get a single fruit. She eats everything. She or somebody also eats. I have a blackberry plant that I keep trying to grow. They'll eat the thorny canes of the blackberry.
Oh, so they eat the plants as well, not just the fruit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whole plant. Yeah. So it's very, very hard to get anything. Like a lot of things like the blackberry will only fruit on second year growth. And so you need it. I have grapes that will only fruit on second year growth. So you need them to get big enough to make it through the winter to be able to bear fruit the following year. And it just never happens.
Wow. Do you know for sure that Mildred is a female?
No.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no, it's just my guess. She seems, it's just the vibe that I get.
Yeah.
But yeah, if she is a female, she's very likely to have little baby groundhogs underneath the shed as well that she's feeding and taking care of for some period of time before they go venture out on their own. And but I mean, she's got the best situation possible. The house is already really sheltered, and
Mm.
the shed even more so. And then she's got this compost pile, and she's got a whole forest of food plus the garden. It's pretty sweet.
Wow, that's so interesting. That does sound challenging. So every day for you is literally Groundhog Day
It's literally
because
Groundhog Day. Well, except in the winter where she's asleep. But yeah.
oh, do they hibernate during the
Yeah.
winter?
Yeah, I looked it up this year because I was worried. I converted the shed into my sort of studio space. And I was worried I was going to make too much noise in there. So I wanted to set up a treadmill desk and some other things. And I didn't want to disturb her too much, but they sleep very solidly. I
Huh.
forget the numbers, but their breath drops to just a couple of breaths per minute. Their heartbeat slows way down to just a couple of beats per minute. So they're really in kind of a stasis sort of state. And then they wake up as soon as it's warm enough and start eating everything.
Wow. So you're really looking out for her, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she's got a hard life out there. There's a lot of groundhog haters in the world. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. What have you done to try to protect your plants or deter her?
I mean, the garden area in general is fenced, but she's chewed right through it. And she could be the sole culprit, but there are also rabbits around here who could be culprits. There could be other groundhogs that I haven't seen scurrying in and out of the fence.
Okay.
Um, but I would suspect, based on the general behavior and the level to which things are predominantly eaten, that these are little ground dwelling critters. We have some very vigorous squirrels here as well. I'm worried about the squirrels getting into my fruit trees this year. So my apple tree is fruiting for the first time since I planted it 3 years ago, which I'm very excited about. I had to
Yeah.
go out there the other day and Sophie's Choice a bunch of apples off of it because it's you have to thin them, which
Okay.
is heartbreaking. But I did that. So there's still about 10 apples on it. And I'm feeling very protective of them. But squirrels could totally scurry up there and eat those, or the nectarine tree or the mulberry tree or anything. So, and
Can
then
you use the thinned apples as like a decoy? You know?
to some degree, I just kind of threw them out into the field for deer to
Yeah.
eat or whoever was going to eat them. But there are strategies to plant hedges of wildlife friendly food. That's kind of the long term plan, is to have a hedge
Mhm.
of wild apples and to try
Mm.
to snag anybody who's coming in for a meal with easier to access food so they don't have to jump or chew through a fence. But it takes time. The ideal is that you have a better fence. Fences are just really expensive, so I have not had the fundage to do a really proper garden fence, especially one that keeps out deer, which needs to be probably 7 or 8 feet tall. It's just not on the cards. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, the really like individual trees that I've just planted that are very vulnerable, I will do like I'll put a tomato cage and a little bit of fencing around those to protect them as best I can. But everything else just kind of has to fend for itself. So
Wow. And what kind of fence keeps out a squirrel?
I think some sort of really pretty fine mesh, like hardware fencing, like something that you could like screen soil through, something tighter than chicken wire. They can fit through a
Wow.
lot of mesh. So certainly the stuff I have right now, yeah, they'll just chew through it, no
Oh,
problem.
right, right. And they can climb really high
They
too.
they'll climb and throw down fruit and yeah, so
Interesting.
yeah, and there's the birds.
Mm.
So birds are also, I have right now, both my gumi tree and my Nanking cherries are putting on fruit that is starting to get edible. So I've been able to eat a few of those already. And throughout June, they'll all start to ripen. And the birds are very interested in both of those. So
What kind of fruit did you say?
the first one is gumi, which is a
I don't know
relative.
what that is.
Yeah, it's like the Sour Patch Kid fruit of the natural world. The fruit
Oh,
tastes very sweet and very tart,
oh,
and there's different varieties. Some are sweeter, some are tartar. I forget which one I have. Maybe feel like it's called scarlet something, but it's delicious. It's if you like kind of sweet tart berries. They're a relative of autumn olives, which are wild
Huh.
to this region, and you'll find all over roadsides and disturbed areas. But it grows pretty vigorously. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's a good tree to have. A lot of
Wow.
people
Huh.
don't like the fruit that much, but I really like it. And then the other one is a Nanking cherry, also known as a bush cherry, goes by a couple of different names. Amazing hardy plant that makes this, yeah, beautiful little, I think they're technically plums, or they're closer to plums, but
Okay.
they cosplay as cherries. And they're delicious as well. So, and they make really, really
Interesting.
beautiful flowers in the early spring. So, highly recommend both those plants.
How did you like come to plant those or
I
even
was
think of them?
I was looking for things that were like neither of those is native per se, so I mostly look for native or at least non-invasive type bushes and trees to have. But I wanted something that was drought resistant, cold hardy, nitrogen fixing if I can get it, just pretty robust. So kind of I have this natural selection approach to everything that I grow, which is that
Mhm.
I don't baby things, and I'm not out there with a watering can all the time. Kind of if they
Mhm.
make it, they make it. And generally, if things make it through their first season and get deeply rooted enough, they can withstand things. But both
Mhm.
Gumi and Nanking Cherry have a reputation for being pretty tough customers. They once they get established, it's pretty hard to kill them. And we have really variable weather here, much like you do, where this has been a really cool, really rainy spring. Last two
Mhm.
springs here were incredibly hot and dry. So you kind of don't know. You don't know what sort of weather you're going to get. Could be a really wet summer. A lot of plants don't like what they call wet feet, so they don't like their roots getting wet and staying wet. So I want things that can kind of just go with the flow, depending on what, extreme temperatures, extreme weather events that are going to be more resilient to that.
Interesting. I keep like analogizing to parenting,
Yeah,
like imagining a parent saying this, like, these are the kind of kids I want that can just kind of do fine, like I
that's
could
kind of
just,
how I was raised. Sink or swim. You'll figure it out. But yeah, definitely no helicopter parenting of my plants. I
yeah.
do try to protect them from the basics and try to give them their best chance at getting established. But like even when it comes to planting things, you'll find different philosophies behind planting trees. Some people dig the hole and then fill it with a bunch of compost and a bunch of like,
Mm.
to really give the tree a bunch of good stuff to get started. I do not do that. I'm like, hey, this is the native soil. If you don't like it, you're never going to like it. This is not going
Mm.
to work out. So you
Mm.
better,
Change your environment. Yeah.
yeah, like, well, yeah, you just basically don't have a choice as a tree. So you're like,
Right.
this is really high mineral, high nutrient soil here, but it's clay. It's pretty tough. You know, yeah, it's hard clay. And so
Hmm.
you need pretty vigorous roots to get through that. And it retains
Hmm.
water pretty well. So it's, if you don't like super wet feet, that might be a problem. So yeah, just, adapt or die.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, okay, so switching from this area of your expertise, which is gardening, I want to do a pivot to one of your other areas of expertise, which is psychology,
Okay.
and particularly evolutionary psychology. One of the benefits to me of the COVID era was that it really brought to the forefront virtue signaling. Like that was when that term became common parlance and when people could really, really see it in action. And I think a lot of people, regardless of where they stood on the COVID stuff per se, they have maintained that awareness of virtue signaling. And it's just so interesting to me. It's something, I mean, I was aware of it before COVID, but I think now I would say that I'm just more like much more prone to attribute almost everything to virtue signaling. Very little is pure. And I'm aware of this in my own behavior too. Although I would say that in some instances I don't really want to be signaling. Like I'm just because I don't really like to draw attention to myself. So sometimes when I do things, I really am. I would say I am. I'm not trying to signal. I'm trying
Mhm.
to, advocate for a cause. But one thing that is very interesting to me is people will signal all kinds of virtues, but a lot of people they're signaling. Well, for vegans, sometimes people signal their vegan virtues, but a lot of times people will signal anything and everything other than their veganism
Mhm.
because they don't want to turn people off. And I know that's a very broad topic, but just curious, what thoughts come to mind for you in that regard?
Just in on vegan virtue signaling and
Yeah,
specific.
yeah, both. Like for people who signal virtues, I'm thinking particularly in the world of social media and social justice. People like to signal all kinds of things, but then often they won't talk about veganism.
Mhm.
That's not one they want to signal. So some people are kind of closet vegans, or some people will just they'll just signal their support for any marginalized population, but
Mhm.
won't mention the non-human animals or even the vegan humans. And
Mm.
I don't know, is that something, like, have you thought about that at all or noticed that? Or yeah,
It's
just curious your thoughts.
funny. Like the non-vegan world has this perception that vegans won't shut up about being vegan.
Exactly. Right.
You know,
Right.
how
Right.
do you know someone's
Because
vegan?
there's that. Yeah, there is that aspect for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And so they feel pretty oppressed by how vocal and aggressive vegans are.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think you're talking about maybe that being a more vocal minority of people who are signaling their status as vegans, but then maybe you have this silent majority behind them who are not saying anything. And I don't know that I've observed that, but I don't know that I would know. I don't necessarily know closeted. I don't think I know any closeted vegans at this point. That's something I would have definitely. I remember feeling that way. I remember feeling, 20 years ago that, yeah, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to put people off. I'm going to kind of fly under the radar on this. But I haven't felt that way in a long time, even in the town that I live in, which is not a very vegan town, not a vegan town at all. Like it's just, I think it's gone mainstream enough that even in this sort of rural America, red state locale, people know what it means. They'll grudgingly accept it. So I don't know that I've observed that, but it would be very irritating if I did know that there were social justice signaling vegans who were silent about veganism. If I observed that in the wild and knew that they were doing that, I would find that super frustrating and be like, what are you doing? Where are your values?
Yeah, it is interesting because you're right. Non-vegans definitely do think about us vegans in that respect. Like, we won't shut up. How do you find out if someone's vegan? Just wait, they'll tell you.
Yeah,
And
right.
so there definitely is a lot of that. But then I still think, and just in my own anecdotal experience, I know a lot of people who just don't talk about it. They'll signal other virtues, but they won't highlight that one
Hmm.
because it's going to turn people off. Like, I'm thinking specifically like in the therapy counseling world,
Hmm.
mental health, and just people will, again, they'll signal all kinds of stuff. But to me, it's just, they don't want to signal the thing that there's something that people can actually do something about,
Hmm.
because that's too much pressure. It's the way I see it, and you can tell me what you think, but I kind of see it as there are plenty of things to virtue signal on that are just, they're just a win-win. Like, they're
Right.
going to meet with positive reception, and people don't have to do anything. Like, people can't really do anything about it
Mm.
other than maybe do some signaling themselves.
Right.
And so
Change
there's
your, your Instagram profile photo for a day or something like that. That's,
right, right, sign a petition or
yeah.
something.
Well, even signing a petition actually is an action, even if it's not a very effective one. But so much of what
Right,
I think of as true virtue signaling is, it's not so much a trend now as it was 4 or 5 years ago. But the border around your Facebook photo, indicating that, I'm vaccinated, we can do this together, or making your profile photo just a black square for Black Lives Matter, and these kinds of things that people will do. And I think, yes, goes back to that conversation that we had about specifically the counseling world and the ethics of the counseling world, and there being kind of these universal goods. Like it's okay to be out and proud about being anti-racist. It's okay to even hold that ethical line with a client to some degree, and to question clients when they're deviating from that. But yeah, the idea of veganism qualifying at that level of being accepted as a universal moral good is just not. It's not there. It's not there in the counseling world. It's not there in the general population, even though it is there. I just had to take I'm in a testing and assessment class right now. And so we're having to take a lot of assessments, like a lot of psychological tests and assessments, to think about them and talk about their issues and all of that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
How is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The one that I took today for the assignment that I'm doing this week was kind of an emotional intelligence assessment. So enormously long assessment, 350 questions, took forever to do. And the first half was reading faces and interpreting what was going on with people. But then there were other questions, like the one that really stood out to me was, if you're in a situation where you become aware that your employer is engaging in unethical practices, and the example it gave was animal abuse. Like it said there was something else, like I don't know, embezzlement, and or animal cruelty. And I just, it really kind of took me aback. Like, okay, we all agree that animal cruelty is a universal bad, and here it is being used in an example question. But are the test authors vegan? Is anybody who is like, well, no, I would speak up against the company for engaging in animal cruelty? Obviously, that's terrible. And so that dichotomy that exists with people, where if it's at the level of an individual animal on the side of the road that needs to be rescued, and they'll virtue signal all day by posting on their social media feed. You see this all the time. Like, I found this poor little wretched creature, nursed it back to health, or I fostered a puppy, or whatever people do. But what are you having for dinner that night? What are you feeding that animal? What are you feeding yourself? There's just such a disconnect there. So we recognize that at some level there is this kind of, animal cruelty. It's bad. We don't want to be cruel to animals, but that doesn't apply to the chicken I'm having for dinner. Yeah, it's just very strange. So all I can hope is that this is the curve of the progress curve, it arcs toward justice, right? We're going toward that outcome eventually. We just have barely taken these baby steps toward it, and that people they have that spark of consciousness where it gets awakened by a specific case or an example like that, and at some point they'll make the connection to broader behavior and broader outcomes. But it's just going to take this cultural change, and this probably generational change.
Yeah. In fact, I was looking up that quote just the other day for a satirical piece I was doing, but you were referencing the Martin Luther King Jr. quote. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Yes. And right now it's a little fuzzy, to be sure.
A little fuzzy.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Yeah. Animal cruelty. Everybody is, at least on paper, against that. Right. Like at a writing workshop I was at last summer, they were talking about all kinds of techniques, literary techniques for character development. And a big one is, if you have a villain, but you need the villain to be a little likable,
right.
Save the cat scene.
Save the cat. Yeah. Or if it's you need to establish that everybody likes the guy, but he has a secretly evil heart. He's kicking puppies behind the scenes, or he does something cruel to an animal. It's like such a trope. And it works. Like, immediately you're either on that person's side, or you see them as the villain in the story. And even all the homesteading accounts I follow and the gardening accounts I follow, where these people have animals that they're planning to slaughter that they are very loving with and very have a very personal relationship with. They name these animals. They speak about how they want to be very kind and not cruel to them, and then but it's okay to kill them. It's okay to eat them. So yeah.
It continues to blow my mind, especially for really, intelligent, thoughtful people. Like the people who come to mind are Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying,
Yeah.
who host the Dark Horse podcast, which, I listen to fairly regularly. And, they're just so reflective and so thoughtful and give so much consideration, to so many issues and really dig deep. And yet this is just one where they just won't go there. It's pretty amazing to me, just the level of, denial, or just like the power of social convention, I guess. It's,
Yeah, in their case, they are, just wildly speculating. I think Brett is celiac, and probably when he was
right.
diagnosed,
I forgot about that.
the
Yeah.
the idea was if you're celiac, you move towards something resembling a keto diet, or there's just kind of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
natural. And then I think they've just convinced themselves that that's where the evidence points, that the highest nutrition food is in the form of animal food, which might even be superficially correct. If that's really your level of analysis, that literal nutrients per calorie is probably in organ meat. They're just not looking at the cost side of that equation. They're not looking at both health wise and of course to the animals, which they don't seem to have that ethical sensibility at all, which is what I think you're getting at.
Yeah, totally. I mean, probably in part because they're scientists
They're
and
coming from this.
researchers, so they,
they,
come
they
from that
feel this is the
perspective.
rational, analytical, correct thing to be doing. I was really struck by Scott Adams, the Dilbert cartoonist, was recently diagnosed with what Biden was diagnosed with. He's got stage 4 prostate
Oh,
cancer.
I hadn't heard about
Has
that. Okay.
metastasized to the bones in Scott's case as well. And he was tweeting he doesn't expect to live through the summer. I think he is thinking his prognosis is a little more hopeful now because he's undergoing some treatment that he won't disclose. But he, of course, is under a barrage of recommendations and feedback from people. And so he's posted on his Twitter feed this kind of pinned disclaimer: don't give me advice. I don't want to hear it. I've heard it all. And he says at some point, yeah, don't tell me to fast or to change my diet. If any of that worked, someone would have noticed by now.
Haha, really?
That
Oh,
was so
that's
amazing. Like how much of a bubble, like we live in such different bubbles. The Weinsteins are
that's
living in their own bubble where
yeah.
the science says we need to eat organ meats and lots of olive oil, as long as it's the right kind of olive oil. And that's the anti-cancer diet. And then the bubble that we're in is a completely different bubble. And so it really does become, I think, for people who straddle these worlds and who don't have the ethical component on board, and are really just trying to do the most self-preserving thing for their health, I think it is tough for people to really sort out which experts are right and which science is right. The ethical piece is just so essential, I think, if you're going to really commit to veganism as a lifestyle choice and not just a plant-based diet to save your own skin, basically.
Well, that's what astounds me again, like with people like Brett and Heather, because the animal, agribusiness is it's so horrifically cruel,
Mhm.
so awful. And I think pretty much everybody has to acknowledge we don't have to eat animals. Like we
Mhm.
don't have to. Like it's far from difficult not to do so. And to justify like this enormously just awful industry that slaughters and confines animals
They
at
don't see themselves, again, just to speculate as to their state of mind. I don't think they see themselves as defending animal agriculture. I think if you interrogated them, they would agree that it's an abomination and it's terrible and it must go. But they are above it all because they have their grass-fed cow meat that comes from their neighbors that they buy the share of cow from, and it's all this very local process. And it's kind of this it's a little bit of a tragedy of the commons problem, this classic idea that everybody kind of does the thing that's best for them, optimizes their reality, but the common good gets destroyed as a result because you don't actually have any constraints on how much people can take from the common. And I think in the case of people like the Weinsteins, there's this, well, we're not part of that system because we get our meat locally and ethically sourced and grass fed and happy
Yeah.
chickens and blah blah blah, and so we can occupy this space where we're against animal agriculture even though we continue to eat meat, and there's not this perception of the relationship between those things and that you are still supporting the industry by eating your backyard chickens. There's just not a lot of thoughtfulness and reflection about that connection or the implications of it. There's this feeling that you've opted out and that you're clean, and so
Right.
you get to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my theory as to why there's some research showing that people who read Michael Pollan's book,
Mm-hmm.
what was the name of that book again? His big one. I know he's written several.
I just remember the
Um,
line, the eat food, mostly plants, not too much.
Nuts,
I can't
yeah.
remember what the book is called.
The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Right.
Yeah, that one. But there was research showing that people who read that book in college were less likely to go vegan or even
Because
vegetarian.
they felt like
And that's my theory, is that they felt that just by reading this and
yeah.
thinking about it, that
Mm-hmm.
they'd kind of done what they needed to do. They'd satisfied their moral
Totally.
obligation.
I mean, I know so many people like that living in the Pacific Northwest for years, who really were quite smug in their sense of, well, I'm very educated on this topic and I make consumer choices for myself that align with
Right.
my values. And, that animal agriculture, CAFO stuff, that's for the poors. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's not something that affects me or really challenges me. And so, yeah, you can really live in this dual reality where you feel like your side of the street is clean, even when you're still propping up the industry.
Yeah, like years ago, I remember going on a date with a guy who was on like a very, I don't think it was totally carnivore, but heavy meat diet. He also was, an ultra athlete and had pre-diabetes, even though he was not overweight and fit. So to me, interesting, like someone like you, I wouldn't expect to have pre-diabetes, except that you
Mm-hmm.
eat almost entirely meat.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling me, I knew the relationship was doomed when he told me that he was part of something called the Low Carb Action Network.
Oh no.
And I know,
Is
like
that,
it sounds so innocuous, to people who don't
Jimmy
think about
Moore's
these things. But
thing?
I immediately, what's that?
Is that Jimmy Moore's thing? That sounds like something that.
I don't even know. But I mean, it was horrifying to me when I looked into it at the time. But it was, advocating in schools, like it was, from like elementary education to like, let's advocate for lower carbs and, obviously more meat. And so I was just, I was horrified and was, doing my best not to completely unleash my veganism on this poor unsuspecting guy. But I did say to him, the world can't produce enough. Like, if the way you're eating really is the healthiest way to eat, it would be impossible for everyone to eat like that.
Yeah,
The
this is
planet couldn't sustain that,
right.
And he, like, I could tell that struck a chord, and he didn't feel great about it, and he didn't really have an answer for it, but he was just going to keep doing what he's doing.
Yeah,
Which,
that's the
yeah,
heart of the problem, is the elitism that's baked into that perspective.
yeah,
And it's hilariously ironic because the carnivore people will accuse the vegans of being elitist and out of touch, and
I know.
this isn't the natural human diet, and this is just the diet of the soy boys of the progressive 21st century. And
Yeah.
but yeah, this lack of understanding of just, if okay, everybody gets their own backyard pasture, and is, going back to the agrarian lifestyle. We can't support that at scale, certainly not along with all of the other lifestyle factors that you benefit from as a high salaried urban professional who gets your Whole Foods order delivered by drone to your high rise apartment in the middle of the city. Like, you can choose one or the other. You can have the experience, but you don't get to have all of those amenities and the externalities and the hidden costs that allow you all of those amenities, and certainly the entire planet, and all the many billions of us can't live that way. And so there is this willingness, like, oh, well, but I can live that way. And so that makes it morally justifiable. And I'm just going to have a blind eye to the masses who can't live this way because they're not enlightened yet. They haven't read Michael Pollan. So
Right.
it's very,
Right.
very elitist orientation toward the problem.
Yeah, very elitist. And then also this unspoken assumption of human superiority. Like, of course, our interests trump those of all other animals. Like, it's so obvious it doesn't even need to be discussed or debated.
Yeah.
And I know even for me, I came into veganism with that assumption myself, thinking, well, we don't need to do that to animals, but still, obviously humans are superior in a lot of ways. And I did watch this YouTube video that I've mentioned on the show before, but it's called The Superior Human ? And it does a really good job of discussing and breaking down intelligence, the concept of intelligence, and pointing out that the tests that show that we humans are the most intelligent species are all based on, scales of human intelligence.
Yeah, they're not normed for animals.
They're not normed for, sonar abilities or for, smell abilities
and navigation and all of it.
Yeah. I mean, we're pathetic based on, the standards that other animals do without any difficulty. But I'm curious, Jen, before I forget, how emotionally intelligent are you based on this assessment?
99th percentile, apparently.
Whoa.
According to this.
Whoa.
I'm pretty impressed. I would have guessed that I would have been pretty high, which is why I chose that one out of the and I'm like, well, I want to choose the one that I'm going to score high on.
That's amazing. Wow. Congratulations.
I have very high IQ. So I read faces well, but I can't remember if you and I talked about this offline. I don't think we've talked about it on the show at all, but there's this very interesting research into people who exhibit borderline traits. Have we had this conversation?
I'm not sure.
I definitely sort of consider myself to have, I have a friend who, we were talking about this the other day, and I'm like, I wade around in the shallow waters of borderline. It's kind of like my childhood dynamics contributed to sort of certain symptoms that would qualify me for that sort of diagnosis, which should destigmatize it if people really look at themselves and consider how they deal with a relationship when they feel really abandoned or sort of relational things that are very, very challenging. I can see some of myself in some of those characteristics, but I would probably qualify as what they call a quiet borderline. So I'm not out there slashing tires or marching into the bar to go pick a fight with somebody. It's all sort of an inner storm that's happening for me. And so some of this, the reason I bring it up is there's this really, really interesting research looking at people who show some of these traits and the false positives that they can have for people who are interacting with them in a truly neutral way. So the good news is that they're very good at reading faces. They're very good at detecting the unseen that's going on in a dynamic and telling what's actually happening here. But they hit false positives all the time too. So they're better than the average bear in their emotional intelligence score because they really are seeing that your smile is fake, and they really are seeing that you say you're happy for me, but I don't think you are, and all of that stuff that they can kind of, it makes them very skilled interpersonally, but it also makes them more prone to the false positive of feeling offended when really somebody did not mean it personally, or something was truly presented as neutral and they think it's about them, but it's not. So I thought that was very interesting. So I knew that going in, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to read these faces better than good.
That's so interesting because obviously I would never have thought of you as someone who wades in the shallow waters of borderline personality. So, well, tell me this: do you agree with Dr. Doug Lyle's like articulation of borderline personality as high disagreeableness and high neuroticism?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. So, what is it to you?
No, I don't see it as coming from disagreeableness. I see it as coming from a sense of desperation and an inability to stabilize your nervous system in the face of a perceived threat. So there's something, the common understanding is that it's mostly linked to abandonment issues, and I think that that does apply in many cases. But I think it's more about the sense of self just getting profoundly disrupted interrelationally. So big, deep shame being excavated by some trigger within a relational trigger that could be related to abandonment, or it could be related to feeling super criticized in the relationship, or there's just something that collapses that sense of self and that ability to feel okay and self-regulated and intact within the relationship. And in my case, it is a very sort of trigger based thing. I'm not going through life feeling that way all the time, but there are certain things that can kind of come out of left field and leave me feeling really, really dysregulated and having trouble locating my sense of self without filtering it through what that other person is doing. So I don't think it's stemming from innate disagreeableness. I think it stems from primarily a childhood environment that was super unpredictable, and probably where your caregiver was both a source of comfort and a source of fear.
Right. That disorganized attachment.
Yeah. Which I think is just another word for borderline. So I observed first that I had disorganized attachment when I was trying to understand my attachment style. And then as I kind of dug into that and had a better understanding of what that really looks like and how it plays out, it's like, okay, I can see that there's some of these characteristics. And just, I'm not diagnosed, and I can't diagnose anyone, and I'm not diagnosing myself, but I just observe that just like narcissism, or just like these other terrible things that we have highly stigmatized, and we like to think other people have these things, but I don't. I see myself as having those traits. I see myself as having narcissistic traits as well. And, again, not all the time, but they are in there, and they can be activated under specific conditions. And if we were more honest with ourselves and more humble and self-reflective, I think most of us could locate ourselves on these continua.
Yeah, I totally agree, because that's what they are, is a continuum. They're not all or nothing, and
Right.
that's why. I mean, I know you're a fan of Carl Jung,
Mhm.
and his book, The Undiscovered Self, really was pretty game changing for me, because it's all about that topic. Like, we can't look at somebody else and say, "Oh, you're borderline personality." I'm not. Like, I don't have to think about that. I don't have to worry about that. Recognize, I mean, kind of like Charles Darwin, who talked about, like, it's a difference in degree, not in kind,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and so
Yeah.
Jung, in that book, which is a small book, I definitely recommend it, but he really counsels people to be self-aware and just recognize, okay, you're talking about what Hitler did, but when in yourself do you notice some exclusionary attitudes, or some superiority, or some just discounting of another person's experience? Like, you can't claim that you don't. And the real danger for humanity is when we do think we're better and we're immune and we're different from
Mhm.
those people. So, I mean, I think all of these are psychological states, but they have lots of facets. And I totally agree that most people can at least understand what narcissism is. And if you can understand what it is, you can't understand even what it is if you don't have a tiny bit of it yourself.
Right.
If you didn't have a tiny bit, you would just not be able to make any sense of it. So
You spot it, you got it, as they say in 12.
yeah, which is, an oversimplification, but I mean, I think the point is just that we all have like a little bit, like none of us is,
100%.
and
Yeah.
even, yeah.
And the more we dwell in that space of projection where, everybody, like, I feel so safe and reassured that this other person has this disorder that I don't. It's, yeah, this kind of binary thinking of it. It
Yeah.
is a dangerous position interpersonally, and it's a dangerous position politically and globally, as Jung points out. I always have people start with the undiscovered self with the whole Jung catalog, because I think it's such a wonderful introduction to the implications of his thinking. It's not the most 101 level to start with, but it is a very good place to see, like, the importance of doing this work on yourself and getting to befriend your shadow, which is these
Mm-hmm.
things like narcissistic traits or borderline traits or whatever we want to call them. That, to the degree that you don't surface those things and integrate them in yourself, you're always going to see them in the other, and that makes you more violent. It makes you
Right.
more prone to see them as other, and to treat them accordingly, and that is what leads, in his view, to pretty much all political destabilization and strife and everything. So that it's not this navel gazing, unimportant thing to do this work on yourself, that really is the
Right.
peaceful, peace promoting thing that you can do,
Yes.
is to befriend
Yes.
the shadow.
Yeah. And like at the time that I read it, I was doing a 4th step and a 12-step program, which,
Mhm.
for people who aren't familiar with that whole process, but the 4th step of the, famous 12 steps is a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
Mhm.
And so it's part of the 12-step recovery programs. And at the time, I did I did wonder how much of this was kind of self-indulgent and
Mhm.
navel gazing. And then reading that book, The Undiscovered Self, just really shifted my perspective. No, this is the most important thing that I need to do.
Mhm.
Not forever and not, every second of every day, but I do need to get a handle on, okay, what are my shortcomings? What are the areas where
Mhm.
I can identify with the Hitler or the the Stalin or the serial killer or just the jerk,
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, yeah, the fourth step is probably the only way in which a large percentage of people engage with anything resembling shadow work, out there in normal life. It's just our whole lives, and certainly social media. I mean, I think social media's main flaw is that it enables people to go all in on the projections. They just live in projection land, and they do none of that inward seeking and understanding. You are rewarded for avoiding it. You are rewarded for seeing it in the other and villainizing the other. And even the rise of the kind of pop psychology, if you scroll TikTok or whatever, the TikTokification of mental health, you're going to see a lot of that kind of diagnostic stuff. Like, here are the criteria,
yeah,
and here's what meets it. And it just really enables people to externalize and see these pathological characteristics as inherent to somebody else, but not to me. I can sit here in judgment of them and feel superior to it. And that's the opposite of what real growth looks like individually, and also it's very stunting and degrading to society at large, and leading us to more interpersonal violence and just
mhm.
general badness.
Right, right, and, like, when we get into this labeling, like, "Oh, he did that because he's a narcissist.
Right.
She did that because she's borderline."
Right.
Like, no, that that description, that label is just a description. What was it that he did that makes it, consistent with the descriptor, narcissist. Like that's
I mean, even like to the big five, right? So
yeah.
the talk that I gave, I think at the third True to Life, where I talked about this research into big five characteristics, and
Yeah, how they can vary
they
to,
very
interaction to interaction and
totally.
yeah.
So within an individual in a 24-hour period, you were showing just as much variation in every single big five trait as you're going to find across the population.
Mhm.
So at any given moment, yeah, you're disagreeable, but you could be as agreeable as the 99th percentile of the bell curve for the population, you're going to exhibit that amount of variability as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
that holds across the board. Everybody does that to
Yeah.
some degree. There's a high confidence interval for that. So that was fascinating. It's sort of like, okay, we're taking a snapshot of people. And yes, people do have a central tendency. They sort of,
Yeah.
if it's
Yeah.
a
They have kind of a
curve,
baseline sort of, yeah,
they
default. Yes.
more of the time, but they certainly have the capacity for the whole spectrum,
Right.
and so it's very infantilizing and limiting to say, oh well, this person just did XYZ because they're neurotic or because they're disagreeable. It's just
Yep.
really not seeing the full person and the full spectrum of their experience and their history and everything else. So that's why I definitely don't like to map on like cluster B disorders to big five characteristics. I think that is a perilous road to go down,
Mm.
because people are just much more complicated than that.
Yeah. I find it interesting to consider, the possible associations, but yeah, I mean, what you were saying about the individual variation, just moment to moment and day to day, like
Mm-hmm.
that's true of just about every psychological condition that there is, like
Mm-hmm. Totally.
anxiety. Well, okay, one of the questions I've learned to ask in sessions, like, do you always feel that way? Are there exceptions? Like
Right.
it's called the exception question. Was there an experience you can remember where you didn't feel that, where you weren't depressed, you were happy, where you were enjoying the moment, where you felt relaxed, and people can always identify, or nearly always identify, like, oh, well, in that moment, under those circumstances, I did not,
Right.
feel the
Right.
thing that I'm saying I feel all the time. And so, okay, well, that right there tells us you don't have to feel that way all the time. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to act that way all the time. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Nothing is as black and white as it can be tempting to make it out to be. Well, one area of research that I also am fascinated by is Myers-Briggs,
Mm-hmm.
that's the personality test that certain mutual friends of ours are not a fan of. But I happen to just, I find it very interesting. I'm not saying it's everything, but I do find it a very helpful way of understanding people. And I did a little research. Well, basically asking ChatGPT, but I asked ChatGPT, what's the most common Myers-Briggs personality type for people who are vegan?
Oh,
Yeah, do you have any like guesses on that?
an I, an N, an F, a J.
Well,
Well,
that's me. You just
my,
described
that would be
me.
my guess. If it's
Yeah.
not the most popular, it's probably up there. It definitely would be I, and I feel like N is more likely. F, it's got to be an F, and J seems likely as well. So the I guess NS is the one I would have the most questions about, but INFJ seems the most likely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, that's what I am. I've
Yeah.
definitely met quite a few, what seems to me a disproportionately high number of INFJs in the vegan world, and INFJ is one of the rarest personality types, so that's
Mm-hmm.
consistent. ChatGPT said that there isn't a huge body of research on this, but it
Right.
made some guesses, and yeah, the first one was like you identified, and I had noticed this too over the years, is the F, feeling
Mm-hmm.
overthinking, because we have that enhanced compassion and just
Mm-hmm.
empathy for what's happening to animals. The N was another big one, because that's like bigger picture, philosophical, ethics, sustainability. And
Mm-hmm.
then it was its guess was that introversion and extroversion are kind of evenly balanced. Like maybe
Yeah.
introverts more likely. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I necessarily agree. And I too, I like you would suspect that Jays would be more
Right.
likely to be vegan, but it actually put that as less clear. And so the most likely type that this was its hypothesis was INFP, INFJ, ENFP and ENFJ. So that NF is basically
Yeah.
what it was going for. Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've tested for
Yeah.
years as an ENFP, although recently I've started to question.
I know you are. Yeah. I was going to ask, yeah, where are you in your Myers-Briggs?
I haven't gone deep on it, but I do think there is something to my FT axis being more complicated than I thought it was, because I do
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
my thinking function is pretty well developed, in the sense that the Myers-Briggs describes it and intends it, where I really am trying to understand the world through thinking about it rather than apprehending it through feeling. Um,
Yeah.
and so I might secretly be a T, and I'm pretty sure I'm an I and not an E. I think the E was driven by alcoholism and the legacy of alcoholic behavior. And so I'm definitely, at the very least, in what would that make me, an INTP? But I'd have to kind of look at descriptions and see whether that lands more for me than something else. So it's a whole new world out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm kind of I'm pretty consistent in my INFJ based on all the tests, but I'm somewhat closer on the FT than,
Mm-hmm.
some women are. I think for,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's the same reasons that you described, like just
Yeah.
wanting to think about things, not wanting to make decisions out of, non-reflective emotion,
Yeah.
not
Yeah. I
wanting to
mean,
just react.
when I
Yeah.
listen to myself talk, or when I'm talking to my therapist, like, it's all thinking, 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 thinking. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting information. Let me put that into my model of the world and see how that changes what I might do next. Like, that's how I'm constantly updating things. Not like, oh, let me absorb that and feel that. I don't do that as much. So, um,
Yeah.
it's interesting, and what it suggests for the inferior function. The one thing I did become very aware of with my recent massive decluttering journey with my cleaning out my storage unit is that,
Oh.
as an ENFP, or certainly with a well developed NF core, even if I'm not technically an F, the kind of sensing function is very underdeveloped for me. Like, I don't really get sensors as much. I don't relate to them as well. I don't really understand how they experience the world. But that it's very important for me to kind of create clean, uncluttered spaces, and because I kind of can't function otherwise without that. So
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
trade-off of, this is something that doesn't come naturally to me, but that is actually very important for me to otherwise thrive and function really well, is
Yeah.
an interesting way
Yeah.
and this is part of the superior and inferior function of the Myers-Briggs, kind of guiding you toward how to change your environment, or thinking about those things that might not be naturally part of your instinctual programming, but that are going to really improve your life.
Yeah, that's definitely true for me. I mean, I like things clean and organized, but I don't like to clean
Yeah.
and organize.
No,
So,
I've never been like a order things by
yeah,
spices alphabetically or something like that. But I really,
I do that. I do
yeah.
that. Yes, yes.
Yeah, probably if I did that, I'd enjoy cooking.
Once I actually got a spice rack, that is. For
Yeah,
ages, I didn't have one.
I
So,
would enjoy. I do not have a space rack. The spaces are all over the kitchen, but yeah, it does. It creates psychic space for me to be able to function, and I really can't. I can't access the other functions if things are not at a certain level of orderly. But I don't consider myself an orderly person, and so it's an interesting little trade off.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always wonder what the implications of all this are for, number one, activism and advocacy, and or just truth, because again, if our attitudes and opinions can be predicted based on our personality, what does that
Mm-hmm.
imply for our ability to discern truth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, despite what ChatGPT says, which I would take with an enormous grain of salt, because it was just a meme going around yesterday where ChatGPT was getting the basics of Ferris Bueller's Day Off wrong, like
Yeah,
the
yeah, I heard about that.
mentioning
Yes.
the past was wrong, and just like, so I've seen it hallucinate so many things at this point that I really don't trust it for most purposes. But
Yeah.
I think you're going to find veganism across the board. There are some people who are coming to it from a very sensate, rational, thinking space. There's
Mhm.
tons of people who are going to get themselves there for that reason. As many as are coming from the more feeling empathetic, sort of yeah, unbearable pain kind of place. So I'm
Mhm.
not sure that any Myers-Briggs type or other personality characteristic is an unworkable barrier against seeking at least that truth.
Yeah.
People just come to truth and they feel truth in themselves in different ways, and that they have to follow their path there in different ways. This is part of my problem with the way truth is prescribed from on high in the dietary world and elsewhere, that just really robs people of their own intuitive process, whatever that looks like. It discredits people from getting in touch with their inner wisdom, because it's sort of being communicated by people who have access their inner wisdom for what feels like them from a very rational place, a very objective place, a very non-feeling place. But it's still their intuitive wisdom. They just don't see it that way. It's resonating with them. They recognize it as truth that is important for them to pursue at an intuitive level. It just doesn't go by that language or follow that logic for them. And so I want people to be able to follow the path that gets them up the mountain however they need to get there, without being robbed of their own individual authority and
Yeah.
their own ability to navigate that however they see fit, and to follow their instincts wherever they take them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think ultimately truth is truth, and people eventually get there.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, obviously, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. And forcing the journey or trying to force the journey to be anything other than, that person's individual journey is not very vegan because that's
Right.
not allowing another being to, go through this process. The challenging part, of course, for us people who care about animals is that meanwhile there's horrific animal suffering that's happening while this person has their journey. The one aspect of signaling that I forgot to touch on, but I think is very relevant, are the people who are just very adamant and focused on signaling that they're not vegan, or at least not that kind of vegan.
Gotcha.
There was a video that popped up for me the other day, which I don't watch a lot of videos. I have a selective handful that I follow regularly, but this one I did watch. The subject was, "I'm not vegan anymore," and here's why. And it was a photo of him holding a live chicken. And I don't know, I was curious because I was like, I don't know. I just felt like maybe it would be different from the normal "I'm not vegan" story anymore. And it was basically, it was a guy who sounds like he's pretty much totally vegan, but he does have rescue chickens in his backyard and eats the eggs from his rescue chickens. But it was clear that guy was, and he did speak kind of condescendingly about chickens in general, but I don't know, to me it presented as just posturing and signaling like, yeah, I pretty much, I eat plant-based, but I'm not one of those weird crazy vegans.
Right.
I don't, so they're signaling in that realm too, which is just always interesting to me, because I always wonder, how does that hurt the cause, help the cause? I mean, it makes it confusing for people, of course, because it gives them that easy out with eggs, like, oh, these eggs are different. But at the same time, I don't care if that guy, like, eats I mean, that's not who I have the issue with on the planet. That's the
Mhm.
least of the
Mhm.
animals' problems, are those chickens and their experience. Yeah.
Does feed into that ability for people to go into that projection, though, of, oh well, there are reasonable vegans and unreasonable vegans,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this guy is a reasonable vegan, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that just kind of moves the goalposts of the whole movement and the way people see it. Like I talked about on some previous episode, we did the Hampshire Hamburger Collective, where one
Right.
of the most vocal vegans at that time. I was not vegan yet. I was a couple of years away from being fully vegan. I was vegan curious, but that was really the first place I'd heard about veganism. It was not a concept growing up in Alaska eating moose meat. So it wasn't until I got to college that I even really heard the term or understood what it meant.
Mm.
But one of the most prominent vegans on campus made a point of going and helping flip burgers at the Hamburger Collective to kind of show that she wasn't that kind of vegan. She could hang out with these guys who were having the big barbecue, and she wasn't going to eat them, but she also wasn't going to sit and judge them and so it gave those guys fuel for the fire of, see, why can't everyone be like her? She's cool. She's a cool vegan. You're all uncool vegans. And
Right.
so I do worry a little bit about that, even though, like you, I've got no problem with what that guy's doing. I have thought about, I would not eat the eggs myself for health reasons.
Yeah.
But I might feed the dogs the eggs. If I had rescue chickens who were laying, and I've thought about getting rescue chickens, I looked into it at some point, but I don't feel I could keep them safe enough from the myriad of predators around here.
Yeah.
So everybody wants chicken. So, but yeah, I think at the personal level, what he's doing is, morally fine, but going on YouTube with a big following and sort of making this point of, I'm not like that.
And of course, that's why he's doing it, is to be controversial and to get everybody all worked up on all different sides. And
it's very shady. It's very, the whole thing is not great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, my sister tells me pretty regularly about her vegan friend who's a psychiatrist, who is a cool vegan. She'll cook bacon, when she makes breakfast for people. And why can't I be more like that?
I got a lot of that kind of pushback from my family when I first made the transition, including a boyfriend at the time who was like, yeah, just like, why can't you be like that cool vegan that we knew back at school?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, obviously, I think we're similar in that we're both vegan, obviously, and we're both also really interested in personality and psychology. So and I find the intersection of those two like very fascinating.
I think it is it is going to determine a lot of how people advertise themselves and how they view the lifestyle choice as a liability or as an asset. And a lot of that depends on social ecology as well. Who are you surrounded by? How many of your friends are vegans? Are you totally on your own? Like, that's all going to modulate it too. So
yeah. And obviously, like with everything else, the CB, the cost benefit analysis, like, is this helping me or harming me to out myself right here, right now? And also, is it helping animals, or is it not helping animals?
Right.
And if it's not helping animals and it's going to hurt me, then, of course I'm going to be less prone to doing it. Yeah. Interesting stuff. So, well, lots more we could talk about, but we can leave it there. As always, people are welcome to write in with questions, comments, topic suggestions at veganposse.email@gmail.com. And thanks, Jen, for joining us and going deep and going wide.
Yeah. We may not get to questions for a while because we're doing a hiatus for a while, right? So
correct. Yeah.
But, ask your best questions for when we reconvene.
Yes. And as always, we close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Jen, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Bye.